Hello, everyone. Yeah, before Paul went on with that great all those great comments on Hollis and her team, I was planning to say the same thing. Coming up here, following her and Jennifer, kind of leaves me a little bit short. Maybe they really knocked the ball out of the park on their two presentations, and they've been doing that daily this whole past year. Okay, I'm going to give a quick update on some resource transfer statistics, and that's going to lead perfectly into our panel of transfer facilitators that John Kern is going to host. So let's get on with that. Next slide. All right, I'm going to give an overview of completed transfers, processing time, number of addresses transferred, and size of specified transfer address blocks. Next slide. All right, so here is the transfer volume that we have been completing through the years. The number of transactions, as you can see, they have grown continuously up until last year. We had a little bit of a drop off, but not a whole lot. And I'm not sure if that's saying we've reached a stable, steady state, or if it's a result of the pandemic and people not being able to travel to all the RIR meetings and conferences and talk to each other about, hey, I've got IPs I'd like to transfer, and somebody else saying, yeah, I've got a need and all that. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. I kind of feel like we haven't reached a steady state, that the number of transfers will continue to grow. Next slide. As you can see, the processing time in days are pretty level. We did 2018, they did go down a little bit. They've gone back up recently, a lot of it due to the pandemic. Inter-RIR, we have a new RIR that's participating, and with that there's growing pains, and it actually affects all four of the RIRs that are actually doing inter-RIR transfers today. It just makes it a little bit more difficult for the coordination and the timing of these transactions. Next slide. So number of addresses transferred. As you can see, over the net 5-year change, ARIN has lost, not lost, but has transferred out 19 million IP addresses. Naturally, and this is just natural, the inter-RIR transfer, ARIN has the huge legacy pool, which a lot of the transfers are coming from, a lot of the Class Bs, even some Class As, /16s and /8s, and portions of the /8s that have transferred inter-RIR. So it just really makes sense that that would be the way it is. It actually helps everyone, I believe, globally. ARIN, a lot of since most of those addresses were legacy addresses, it helps to clean those addresses up, get them updated. It moves them out of the books, out of the staleness of the old registrations, and puts them into new registries, new hands, and they're all being put to good use now. I just saw Louis' comment. That is true, Louis. That is true. Next slide, please. Next slide. Am I frozen again? Oh, thank you. In-region transfers. So number of IP addresses transferred, 5-year total is 154 million IP addresses. As you can see, 2017, 2018 were the peak years. There was a lot of big transactions, large transactions over those years. The transactions have, well, we still have a high number of transactions. It seems that the blocks that are actually being transferred are a little bit smaller these days. Next slide. M&A, merger and acquisition transfers, number of IP addresses transferred. As you can see, about 73% of the approximately 488 million IP addresses transferred were due to merger and acquisitions, which, there's a good end result. The blocks covered by IP address blocks in the region covered by an agreement increased from 54% to 63% over the past 5 years. So, that's another very good outcome of the transfer market. Next slide. So a lot of people think that, if you're going to go into the transfer market, you need to have a /16 or a larger block to get out there and participate in it, when in actuality, most of the transfers are your smaller blocks, your /24s, 23s, 22s, and so on. Those seem to be the sweet spots for it. Not a lot. I'll just let you look at that for a minute. Okay, next slide. So in summary, number of transfers are seem to be either stabilizing or they were impacted by the pandemic. Transfer processing time is stabilizing. Hopefully, if we ever get through this pandemic, we can do some things to help with that processing time, bring it down again. Transfer activity is increasing the number of IP addresses that we end up with under agreement, which helps to clean up the database and the accuracy of the database. And most specified transfer blocks are smaller blocks. Those are the conclusions we've come to on this and the summary of it. And with that, next slide should be a Q&A. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Sweeting. I'll remind everyone again that if you are going into Q&A, please make sure to state your affiliation, as well as your name if it's not already in there. And please feel free to raise your hand as well. And we will start with a question from David Humerman from ICANN, asking, do the objectively long transfer processing times, especially for M&A, primarily reflect some of policy overhead, procedural overhead, or responsiveness of parties? I'm asking primarily in the general case, understanding that every ticket is its own adventure.
Yes, David. It's a little bit of all of that, and it's trying to balance the the policy with the procedures, and having the parties involved in the transfer understand why we have to ask for the the documentation that we ask for. And then a lot of times some of the documentation we're asking for is 20 years old, and they have trouble finding it sometimes. Takes them a while to do all that. So it's really a lot of the fact that when they come in to do the merger, most of the mergers and acquisition transfers that take a long time are several years old. They happened many years ago, and people just did not take the time to update their records at that time. They're not all legacy that take a long time. Sometimes it's acquisition that happened back in the early 2000s, and they've been acquired. Maybe the same company's been acquired 4 or 5 times and never updated their ARIN records. So it's a little bit of all of that.
Thank you. I have a hand raised from Donnie Lewis. I'm going to go ahead and make it so that you can unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation.
Hello, my name is Donnie Lewis from the Obsidian Group. The question I want to ask is that you mentioned that there were a lot of addresses transferred out of ARIN, and it was indicated that most of these addresses are legacy addresses going to other ICs or what have you. Is this a function of companies being relocated in other regions and transferring to the the appropriate authority in those regions, or primarily the address being, I guess, sold or so in the open market? And isn't there a concern about, as from an ARIN point of view, of all these addresses is leaving and going elsewhere?
Hi, Donnie. Good, great questions. They are definitely addresses that are being sold on the transfer in the transfer market. People that have had this space for quite a long time and have been holding on to it have found that it makes sense now that they monetize it. And you know, with all the facilitators available out there around the globe, they help to make that happen. Is it a concern? It's not really a concern because these addresses were mostly sit and fallow and not being used. So the fact that you know, they're actually being put back into use and being used being used for what they were designed for. There is some concerns, of course, from the IPv6 side of it, that, you know, the more that people find IPv4 addresses and start putting them to use, the slower that the adoption of IPv6. I won't go into all that. I think anytime you can match somebody that needs something up with somebody that has an excess of it, and they can come to some kind of agreement on how to change hands on that and put it back to use, I think it's a good thing for the entire global community.
Thank you. Question from Lee Howard at IPv4.global by Hilco Streambank. Regarding the inter-RAR transfer time slide, do those times include both RARs, or do they include both inbound and outbound from ARIN?
Yes, Lee, they include everything. It's very difficult to separate out the processing times and put them into buckets. We're attempting to do that because, you know, you need to do that in order to find where you can improve on that, on those times. But yeah, that what I showed there did include both incoming, outgoing, and it included the entire range of time.
Thank you. We have a hand up from Kevin Bloomberg. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Please state name and affiliation.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. Good afternoon. John, in one of your slides, you mentioned that around 74%, give or take, of transactions were done under M&A. And one of the requirements to be able to do a specified transfer is that the space is under LRSA or RSA. And I'm just curious if you've seen where people are cleaning up their M&A, you know, the purchases that from 10 or 20 years ago for the purposes of getting it out to market, rather than just cleaning up their resources for themselves and utilizing. Is that the predominant reason that you're seeing so many M&As? It's just internal cleanup for the purposes of sale?
Yeah. Hi, Kevin. Yeah, that's predominantly. There's also the RPKI factor and the new IRR factor that makes it very enticing for people to clean up their address space and to get them in under the right organizations and the right org IDs and the right agreements. But yeah, for the most part, a lot of the M&A is done. I just want to correct one thing. You said something about they have to be under an LRSA or an RSA to be transferred, and that's not entirely true. If a legacy holder is the same legacy holder and the organization is the same, and they are still operating under the same name that they were when they got it and everything, they can actually transfer space without coming under an agreement. However, those are far and few between. So yeah, so most of it is the fact that they're cleaning up, getting it under the main requirement is that the organization Vets is still operating and is the organization that actually received the space from ARIN. Those are the requirements. And of course, if they've been acquired, then they haven't done the merger and acquisition transfers, then they have to do that before they can do a market transfer.
Thank you, and appreciate the clarification on the RSA, LRSA.
You're welcome.
This time it looks like our queues are clear.
Okay, so this is going to hand off now over to our transfer panel that Mr. Curran will be hosting, and I'm really excited about this. I'm hoping that the community can get some really good information from these guys. Thanks.